Hello, I'm Susan Wu, a part-time consultant with the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium, and I'm also a full-time teacher with Edmonton Public Schools. As Alberta schools are continuing to pivot with the challenges of teaching during a pandemic, educators are continuing looking at ways either within an in-person classroom or a virtual one, or in some cases both, of how to support students' learning. And one of the best ways to do that is to consider using descriptive feedback in looking at student work. So some of you may have already joined us in the spring when ERLC was offering free assessment webinars with Rick Wormley and Thomas Gusky to support learning at home. However, if you missed the first session of descriptive feedback, you can also find it on ERLC's YouTube channel. So welcome to Descriptive Feedback, a deeper dive with Rick Wormley. Although Rick is newly retired this year after many years of being an excellent classroom teacher, educational author and speaker, and instructional leader, he has been definitely busy supporting school districts globally since this pandemic started. And as many of you already know, Rick's areas of expertise is also globally known in the areas of assessment, feedback, grading, differentiated instruction, leadership, literacy, motivation, cognitive science, linguistics, teacher-student relationships, racism, and diversity. So please join me in welcoming Rick back to Alberta.
Thank you, Susan. And for those of you who are just joining in, I would ask your indulgence for the next 30 seconds. Why, might you ask? Well, this is my last session in the series. I did 3 in the spring. I've done 5 now here in the fall, and it brings to a conclusion my relationship with ERLC, although I hope they would hire me down the road for other things. It's been a lovely thing. But I must take stock in the moment and realize how grateful I am for this woman. This is Susan, who's just talking to you, who just deserves so much for facilitating in such a professional manner all that is happened here with me, with Kelly Gallagher, and so many other presenters for the Alberta province, across Canada, and truly internationally around the world. And all of us who know and work with Susan are so appreciative of her facilitation. Her knowledge base is incredible, and her professionalism. So this is my yay, Susan, and thank you from a very great presenter for all you've done for me and the profession. I just continue to look forward to crossing paths with you. So having said that, I can start now. All
Thanks,
right.
Rick.
We'll
Thank
do
you.
that. No more embarrassing comment. Oh, Mary agrees 100%. There you go. That's awesome. So I just can't thank her enough. Now we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for your indulgence, everybody listening. And I'm glad that was a part of the recording. Keep it in the recording. We need to thank each other a lot more often as we go through and do this. Now going back, oh, ripple effect. Yeah, don't say you don't get something for your top education dollar here. All right, we are back. Now, I can't emphasize enough what Susan said. We had so much for 4 hours worth. We did 2 hours back in spring, and really, it was really only about an hour and a half. And then now we have the 2 hours gathered together here. So between the two of them, it should be good. Later on, I will show you just tiny little images of the previous slides, at least some of them, so you know to go back and take a look at that. So truly, this is a part 2. And if something is not fully explained, it might be in the original one. So know we've got that. I will answer questions afterwards as well. I'm also available by email. All of that's going to be given to you, so you can follow up anytime you want. You have me for this 2 hours. You have me for a career. So no worries about that. The elements we're going to encounter, you see listed there at the bottom. So we're talking about principles, dispositions, insights, practicalities, specific techniques, some applications as well. And then a reminder of some of the operating tenets. I'll give you a moment to read the lower right-hand corner of your screen there. If you can make that out or enlarge it just a little bit if you need to. All right. And then follow it up very quickly. You can learn without grades, but you can't learn without the feedback. Feedback is incredibly vital. In fact, especially with remote instruction, our hybrid instruction, more and more of the burden is on students' shoulders to remain attentive, vigilant, to monitor your own progress, because those things that we normally did back in the classroom aren't available to us. So I'm going to remind you, this is probably one of the biggest things you could do this year in order to be successful with your students and help with their own motivation as we go through it and really kind of navigate the difficult, the challenging times ahead of us. So I'm hoping that you'll be a part of that. Susan has just so wisely pointed out, there's the email address. It is included at the end of your handout, but if you want it there in the chat box, it's already available to you. Now, some of you might be familiar with Austin's butterfly. It is only 6 minutes long. So once again, I'll ask your indulgence if you've already seen it. I show this video to high school teachers, college professors, kindergarten teachers, high school teachers, or middle school teachers, everybody in between. It is with primary children. So grade 1s, grade 4s, grade 2s, I think are in here. Understand there's value to this, even in just PD, one teacher mentoring another. There are going to be great elements here. So it kind of sets a tone for how we're going to do a deeper dive. So let's take a look. So these basic questions going into it, I'm priming your brain for what to seek as you watch this 6-minute video. First, what does the teacher, and it could be the one in Boise, Idaho, although Ron Berger, who's talking with students, he's talking to students in Maine on the opposite coast. But what does the teacher do or Ron do? What are the elements of feedback that you see? And then what about helpful feedback was made clear to students? And you will hear the students talk about, hey, what feedback was helpful and what was not. Even though they're quite young, they're pretty astute. And then what elements demonstrated here could you use in your classroom? And then finally, I don't know if you're aware of this, but let's just be mindful. Education's roots come from educere, which means to draw out. What in this video is just perfectly portraying the idea of drawing out from the learner as a way to kind of approach what we do in the classroom. That's going to play a little bit later when we talk about descriptive feedback. So for right now, relax, enjoy, have an afternoon snack. If you're here in this East Coast of the States, enjoy a part of your dinner. Let's take a look, or East Coast of Canada as well. Let's just take a look now at the video. And this is available on YouTube. If you just type in Austin's butterfly, Ron Berger, it will come right up. If you ever want to see it again or use it with students, use it with colleagues. There we go.
What would you guys say to teachers if they're not getting high quality work? Could they learn something from this? And what would you say to them that they could do differently in their classroom? This is a story called Austin's Butterfly. And it's a true story about a first grade boy.
Okay, so let me back up for a minute. I'm going to start that over because it didn't seem to work on my computer here.
What would you guys say to teachers?
There we go.
If they're not getting high quality work, could they learn something from this? And what would you say to them that they could do differently in their classroom? This is a story called Austin's Butterfly. And it's a true story about a first grade boy. And his name is Austin, and he goes to school, or used to go to school, in a town called Boise, Idaho. And in his class in Boise, Idaho, they were studying butterflies, and he had to do a project. His job in first grade was to draw a butterfly, and this is the butterfly that he picked. Austin had to use this photograph as his model, and he had to draw an accurate scientific drawing of this butterfly. This is called a tiger swallowtail.
I knew it!
Can you tell, Toby, why it's called tiger?
Because it kind of has the stripes of the tiger right there.
Good. So here was Austin's job. He was supposed to do a scientific drawing of that butterfly. But remember, Austin was only in first grade. And you know what he did? He forgot to look like a scientist carefully. He got his paper and he just started to draw the image of a butterfly that he had in his head. And he wasn't looking like a scientist. And so this is what he drew.
Whoa.
It's not bad, and it is a butterfly, but does it look exactly like this? No, it doesn't yet.
So now, are we already beginning to see some of the techniques and elements? Comparison of one's efforts to an exemplar. Where does it match? Where does it differ? Is one of the stages, one of the insights in descriptive feedback. and some things you want to do. So I'm going to invite you to be a part of that as well. Yeah, good. Okay. Thank you, Susan. I got your message about turning up the volume. It's as high as it can go. So thank you very much for doing that. So know that you're trying to make a running list of that. Let's continue.
It doesn't look exactly like this yet. Luckily, this wasn't a regular school where Austin went. It was an expeditionary learning school, just like Presumpscot School. And so they didn't look at this and say, good, Austin, you're done. They said, Austin, good start. Now we can start giving you critique so you can do a second draft and make it better, and a third draft and make it better, and you can make it much, much closer to this. And he was ready to go. All of the first graders in his critique group sat on the floor like you guys are, and they decided to split their advice into two kinds. First, just the shape of the wings. And then when the shape was right, they'd give him advice about the pattern inside the wings. Alia, what would you say?
You can make it much pointier.
Good. These wings could be much pointier. Who else would add something? Attack, what would you say?
How about the angle? Because, not to be mean about
Yes.
the angle, it's just not exact. So
Okay, so show me. Come on up here, Attack. Show me what you would ask him to do slightly differently.
like to make it a little longer,
Longer where? Draw where you would do it.
right there.
Okay, so pull this out longer.
Yeah.
That's very specific, Attack. Thank you. Jamila,
Being
what
very
would you say?
specific is a way you respect and honor.
Triangle.
Good. Jamila, I love that. So you're saying more like a triangle shape.
Analogies.
I agree. Well, you know what? Those first graders came up with most of those same ideas. And you know what Austin said? He said, okay, I'll go try. And he went back to his seat and he drew this.
Wow.
Does this look more like a triangle?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did he go out further, like Atak was suggesting?
Yeah.
Did he add some jaggedness here?
Yes.
So I'm reflecting what they
Get rid of
did.
that bottom thing?
Yeah.
So he did listen to his friends and he made it better. It's not perfect.
Listening to feedback.
I'd say don't put those little tail things so pointed in. I'd say put them more pointed down.
Good. Okay, Ethan, what would you say?
I think you should make the wings like this, not like this.
Okay, he listened to his friends and they said, this is really a lot better, Austin. That second draft really is better.
Yeah, maybe you can make the third one.
Good, maybe he could make a third draft. And so he did this draft.
That's the third draft.
That's his third draft, Hadley. That's just right. Elijah, what do you notice there?
Well, one wing's more pointed than the other, and that side is a little bit higher than the other.
Good. Coburn?
Right here, it doesn't have the inside thing still.
Ah, okay. Needs a little bit more of that notch. So do you think maybe he should do a fourth draft?
Yeah.
Well, that's just what he said. He said, shoot, okay, I got round again. I'll go back and do a fourth draft.
Listen.
He listened. Does it look more even like Elijah was suggesting?
Yes.
Yeah. And does it look like it's coming out a little sharper, like Cindy was suggesting? And like Attack was saying, it's a little, the angle.
So affirming the contributions from everybody
Austin
there.
was feeling really good. He said, am I ready to add some pattern? And they said, okay, why don't you try adding?
And small steps. Work on contour first, then you add patterns.
He's good at it. He is so good.
And then they said, Austin, you're ready for color.
Now we add color.
Let's look at his last draft. And what do you think? Did it come out really good? Yeah. Let me show you where he started, just to give you a quick reminder. And then, what do you think about how much progress he made?
Now let's take
What do you think
perspective.
about his progress?
He made like a lot of progress. He persevered doing it.
Yeah.
His friends were honest with him.
What was it about the kinds of advice that they gave that allowed him to get better each time? Hassan?
Well, they told him what was wrong about it.
Did they say it's just wrong, or were they more specific?
They were more specific, but they weren't mean about it.
Great.
He
Hadley.
made 6 drafts.
And so is that something that other kids should learn from? What should we learn from that?
He can make other drafts if it's not right.
Iterations.
So you can keep, if it's not right, you can keep doing more drafts to make it better.
You just don't use things in your head. You want to use sharp eye.
Good. He used the eyes of a scientist. Great.
There's a lot to that, and it was very helpful. But I just wanted to know if you noticed Ron Berger's the way he phrased things. He said, "What would you say?" As if, you know, we're in the school together. What would you say to Austin? What would you say? Like it's a hypothetical scenario. That's less threatening, and the defensive walls don't come up. And we see it as a truly helpful thing. And that's the tone we want to set. Tone really matters, and we'll remind ourselves of that as we move forward. So here are those questions in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself because there are so few of us here as we go through it. What were some of the elements you saw? Well, we kind of identified that. And the second one, what was about feedback that was helpful? What I'd like to do is just ask you, is there anything you saw there that you could probably use with the students you serve? And if you're a building leader, with your teachers, your faculty, your colleagues together, is there anything you could take from this and go, oh yeah, that's something I can incorporate, even if you already do it? It doesn't have to be something new, something you could be already doing. Anybody have one or two? Thank you, Susan, for looking that up, the link. Try to get at least one or two in there.
I know in watching that, actually, we did that today where we were looking at thesis statements. And it's that idea of how do we use questions to get students to understand that part of the learning process is the engagement in breaking down the process. And it's creating a safe space to ask questions, because I know I teach high school, and a lot of my students often are reticent to say what their questions are and their observations even. So it's about creating that safe space for students to feel comfortable making observations or guessing and perhaps being wrong at times.
I love two elements to what you just said. One is making the space safe for that. But two, you start out saying by asking questions, not by declaring, observations, which can be didactic. It can be very threatening to some degree. And what we do is we begin to see descriptive feedback as a coaching mindset, not I will tell you arbitrarily what you need to do to improve. Here are some questions. Do you notice that doesn't come out as far as that? This is a part of that educere. My goal as a teacher is to draw out of you. Well, those of you who study instructional coaching and cognitive coaching, Jim Knight, Kathy Toll, Elena Aguilar, you know that one of the biggest premises we have there is we always try to get the other person to arrive at the discovery, the solution, not us tell them what to do, because then they have a really good visual of you getting it, but we have to get them to the point where they develop it, where they don't need us. And if I give a student an idea, or if I'm mentoring a teacher or a principal, and I just tell them, here's an idea, it's very easy for that person, the student or that other colleague, to get passive about it. And I want it to be active. And then they can start developing their own solutions. So it's through a series of questioning that I draw out, and they begin to make the discovery about what is helpful in descriptive feedback. And, oh, I don't have to be afraid of this. So if we could begin to think about descriptive feedback as a coaching relationship, it might help, it might go a long way. I wrote in there just one of my favorite examples, and it just so helps me when I watch this, that one of the highest forms of respect is to care enough to be specific. So I noticed you did this, and as a result, this. Both of those are very specific. And so does that match what your goal was here? And then now another one we could type in there if you wanted to compare one's efforts to an exemplar. Again, how does it match? Does it differ? And what would I need to do to close that gap? That's kind of the definition of descriptive feedback in so many books, so many research studies. So begin to think about what's this running list of characteristics of successful descriptive feedback. The previous session has lots of ideas, and this session has lots of ideas on that. Anybody else want to contribute one thing they noticed that they might be able to use in their own work?
Again, feel free to just unmute your mic. You can do so by just hovering over the bottom of your screen on the far left where it says mute. If it has a line against it, it means you're muted. You just have to tap on it to speak.
If one of the ideas occurs to you in the course of the slides, feel free to post it. What you do is you give permission to other people to engage in this as well and to reflect on their own work when they see how you're determining what is salient. So I invite you to do that. And if you just want to type away, that's great. I am mindful of time, so I'm going to push ahead because we have a couple other videos as well. But if you have one, it's great. Feel free to post it there. Let's take a look now at this slide. This is one of the slides. There are about 5, 6, 7 of these slides out of the whole package that are from a session I did on assessment in August, when I was trying to get people caught up on assessment principles, busting some myths when it came to assessment, as well as slides from that original May one. This is one that happens to come from both of those. So just know, yes, those will be familiar if you saw either one of those, but it just serves as a reminder, kind of a placeholder in our mind as we think about the new content. And just a reminder, third one down, left side, the idea that we are going to give feedback as to why things are correct and why things are incorrect. And when we have that over and over again, we do see the results of this, wow, a growth if you're doing outside the school metrics like a standardized test for the province or for the state. Yeah, you will see a growth in that if it's a regular habit. But also look on the left and then one down from that, you'll see that reiteration, redos and retakes, relearning, then reassessing as a result after the relearning, you get an uptick as well. And that's a part of it. It's kind of like this. Descriptive feedback is totally bogus. It's a complete waste of your time unless you make it actionable. So that you're given all this feedback, maybe on a final test, final project, lots of really good, helpful feedback. And they're like, you're not going to let me like act upon that and like improve my achievement, go back and do it. That's an exercise of what might have been. And that's really frustrating. Why would we do that? My stance on that, just so you know, is if you do have calendar left, school days left, and you could coach through descriptive feedback a student so they understand something at a higher level and they go back and achieve at a much higher level, I kind of feel like you should give it a go. Like there's a moral obligation or duty somehow to do that. Not just, if time allows, well, you may or may not. No, really, you should give it a try. So it's just something to consider as you're moving forward. And we do talk about that previously. Oh, good. Yeah, I love that. As you model asking questions, descriptive feedback, students will do that in the rooms as well, mirroring the same language. Absolutely. Your lexicon, your use of words is incredibly powerful. Students start adapting that as well. Now, a reminder too from the August session, this is about coaching. So it's about forward movement. And so as we move this, we're looking at not assessment of learning, but assessment for learning. Everything we do is gathering data for that forward momentum. And then a reminder too, that we do this 24/7. So we're looking at like kneading bread. You're always monitoring the consistency. Do I add more moisture? Do I add more flour? That kind of thing. And if I let it rise in the counter, I'm looking at it, lifting the towel a little bit in a warm spot to see if it's rising appropriately. You don't just say, I must now stop all my instruction and do assessment and descriptive feedback to you. You can't have good instruction that doesn't have good assessment and vice versa. They're inseparable from each other. This is the mindset that will carry us forward. Wow, it's windy. Oh, up here on the cliff. Yeah, it should be. So let's take a look. A reminder, the grade, the mark, the percentage, whatever it is not a statement of the student or her character. What's going on? It is a summative judgment as of one calendar date. But here's the kicker, and here's the part that's so much fun. For feedback, it's temporary at best. So if I go through the learning cycle with you and you demonstrate evidence, that's great. But down the road, if you demonstrate subsequent evidence, higher or lower, this grade can change. It is not safely in the bank. Oh, it's in the historical record. But one of the things we learn in assessment kind of 101 is the most recent evidence counts most of all. It is the most accurate indicator of the student in that discipline. So earlier evidence of competence or incompetence means nothing compared to what you know and can do here and now at the end of learning's journey. So feedback is huge in this. Whew, there goes that wind again. Well, what do you mean? It's merely data. It's information to decide how I shift along that continuum. So I'm here in relation to the ultimate goal. Oh, I'm informing where I am. I'm able to self-monitor. I own my learning, and then I take steps closer and closer to that goal. Where am I now? What do I need to do next? Those three questions in that light blue font are probably the crux that form the definition, as we mentioned before, that are in so many books. So it can't be come across as judgment or evaluation, because that shuts the instructional value down when things are judged. Yeah, that was poorly done. Well, you're not going to hear me as I give you critical advice. You're going to be feeling threatened. Your emotions and defensiveness are going to get up. Remember, the brain is out for self-preservation in terms of dignity and energy at every turn. Oh, so what are at least two things teachers could do? Say, the way they frame it, do, actions, whatever, body language, doesn't matter. So that feedback, as we're conveying it, doesn't come across as judgment. Any ideas? How could you phrase it, or what could you do so you don't, it's like Randy on American Idol, or Canadian Idol, whoever your judges are that do this, but Randy on American Idol would do this, a little pitchy dog, and I'm saying a little judgy dog. What are some things you can do? You can pull back from being judgmental. We've talked about several of them already. Anybody recall one? Things you can do to minimize the judging nature. Do it often enough that they're used to it. Absolutely. Build up that comfort. It's interesting. I get people who send me manuscripts for an article for an education journal or for a book, and they want me to edit it. I'm like, great. And I edit it just like editors edit me. And sometimes, I send it back. They refuse to talk to me for several months. They are so hurt. Their feelings are hurt because they're not used to being edited. They're not used to receiving the critique and the feedback. Oh, they're fine doing it to their students, but now I'm doing it to them. And that's a very different relationship. It does make us feel vulnerable. Absolutely. And I frame things hopefully nicely, like, you made this claim here, but there's no supportive evidence or examples of it down below. And that's what people will be searching for here as they read your book. So add in some examples. That was too much for some of them, and they got defensive. So the idea of building up that tenacity of perseverance with receiving critique, spot on, Denise. Anything else you can do to really help make this not come across as judgmental and thereby threatening? We've talked about several. Allow them to evaluate your work. Oh yeah, turnabout's fair play. I love that. It's exactly right. Some students do view feedback as criticism, and we need to explicitly teach them what feedback is for. It is about growth. And truly, if a student begins to receive feedback and then he's able to use that to improve something, they're in. They are sold that it's not a threatening moment where they're crumbling down. They're already, a lot of students are fairly fragile about this, but they want to get comfortable with it. Yeah, I bring in my manuscripts that have been marked up by editors and show how grateful I am, saving me from myself, so to speak, which is what good editors do for writers. It's wonderful. But even in math problems, lab write-ups, computer code, where somebody was able maybe just to circle something and say, hey, take a closer look at that. And then I do the deeper dive and figure that out. Oh, that's great. So remember some of the techniques we've already discussed? So normalizing failure, absolutely. The idea that I ask questions or I try to get you there. So I don't telegraph an opinion, good, bad, correct, incorrect. You know, sometimes teachers can say things where they're kind of leading them and there's one correct answer. I try not to do that. So I will say very point blank, no emotions. I notice you did this, this, and this. How does that compare with the evaluative criteria? And I will say that even if it's correct. So they need to know that's not code or teacher speak for you screwed up, you need to fix stuff. So we do it, remember, if it's correct and incorrect, right? Okay, good, because students need to know why things are correct and when they are correct, not just when they are wrong and when awry and what they have to fix. So I'm going to ask questions so they determine it, not me. That lowers the judgmental, I need to self-defend moment. Does that make sense as we do that? Anything else you might think of you can do to lower that worry, that threat? just want to suggest something to you. If you feel competent at something, you're so much more willing to endure occasional challenges. You summon stamina as you do that because you feel like you have the skill set to do it. So if I said to a student, hey, yeah, that was really a sloppy mess. You should be ashamed. What were you thinking? That's going to immediately put them, back off. They're not going to listen to anything I say. They're going to self-preserve. They're going to make an irrational rationalization. The school is stupid. The teachers all hate me and all of that. But I'm also not giving you any skills. If, however, I said, hey, this doesn't match the exemplar, which is what you're striving for here, I wonder if given these three things that we've already taught you and we built up, you could take that and you could actually apply it here and see then how that creates the match. They have to perceive they have the competencies to make those revisions in the math problem, in the coding for the computer code, make it more agile or more efficient. In whatever it is, in the weightlifting stance, they have to perceive they have the skills to make the change. Otherwise, you're telling them stuff and they don't have the skills. They're going to find a way to get defensive and find what you say threatening. So I'm going to say be very specific and build the skills necessary so they can act upon feedback given. That would be a way to lower the judgmental nature and see it as, oh, this is actually helpful. And so many kids are so relieved when they're experiencing competence. Like they did the reading and they understood the reading from last night, they can totally participate in the group conversation the next day. Whereas some kids who didn't do the reading or they read and they didn't understand stuff, sit there going, oh man, I hope nobody calls on me. And it comes across as like they're lazy or they're disinterested or they're cranky or whatever it is. And they're just sitting there just, oh, please, people don't find out I'm a fake. This is a really basic internalization that happens here if we're not careful. So I would suggest if you want to lower that judgmental threatening feeling that you are very specific and provide those skills if they're not currently there. And then you provide the feedback where they can act upon it. Okay, let's take a look at some other ideas. Wow, it's windy. Boy, it keeps blowing the wind there. So this is something that alludes to something before, and that is that feedback is most effective when it's sought. Imagine that. The students say, could you give me feedback? Not, let me tell you your feedback. What a different relationship. Well, it turns out from the research, John Hattie actually had a mea culpa. What? Yeah, about 8 years ago, 2012, he thought this whole time feedback was something teachers did to students, when really the teacher facilitates so the student is actually seeking the feedback because of the instructional, the benefit, the value that comes from that, and doesn't see it as threatening. Take a look at what he wrote. All right. So some of the ideas from last time and some of the ideas from today really speak to that. I hope that you will avail yourself of it. And if you want to explore that more deeply, we can do that even after today. A reminder in all of this that good descriptive feedback always starts with being evidentiary. You can't even do feedback unless you are evidentiary. So if that's a concern to you, then I'm going to suggest this. Could you get good at being evidence-driven, criterion referenced first? What does that really mean? It means taking your learner outcomes, your standards, your learning targets and goals, and you break them down into what constitutes different levels of proficiency, but you calibrate that with your subject-like colleagues. You prove to me you're evidentiary, you're evidence-driven. So, and we've talked about that before in the earlier session. So can you prove to me you're evidence-driven? What will you accept as excellence and what's almost excellence? So you have those lines of demarcation. You really vetted that with others. So here's an example of how powerful this is. It comes from James Nottingham, whose book, Challenging Learning Through Feedback, I highly recommend, and Jill Nottingham, his wife. I apologize for not saying her name as well. I had dinner with James Nottingham several times at a conference where I was presenting. Really wonderful gentleman, knows his stuff, out of the UK. I believe he is. But I could be wrong on that. I think he's out of the UK. At any rate, one of the things he talks about a lot is this. If I said to you, just draw a house, you could draw whatever you want. And if I gave you feedback, it'd be useless because there were no parameters. Feedback is always in relation to criteria. So what if I said, draw a house that would support 7 people living in it comfortably, have lots of natural light coming in. Good. They would have to have an area for pets. They would have to have at least 2 offices for the various people who need office kind of things going on. And I made other criteria. Then I could give you feedback. It'd be in relation to that. We're good. I could say, what was your goal here? Where are you in relation to that? And what do you need to do next? Just fine. That would be helpful. But if I said, well, you drew a house. Yeah. And it was like a simplistic, really childish notion of a house. If I say, well, what about the windows? What was it? You didn't specify. You didn't do any of that. Well, what about the children who live there? Are there going to be room for children? And it's very frustrating to the student, to the child, to the adult receiving it. So we always must be very clear we have criteria. If you do not have that criteria for success, then do not expect feedback to be the choice, the thing that will work very well. And I would suggest you do something different than feedback at that moment with the students. So again, a slide from the August session. We are really going to be focused on disaggregating and realizing we report only against the standards, the learner outcomes, right? So what does that mean? This is too much to incorporate into one tiny letter grade on a report card. So grades are summative judgments, not very useful for feedback. We want to divide it out. I need a separate rendering for each of these. And you might remember this graph if you were with me before. Each of these students tells a completely different story. But if I just did the average, which comes out to be the same for each student, that is a distortion of the truth. But it doesn't reveal where the student is. So what we're going to do when we do descriptive feedback is my assessment revelatory? Is it broken down into standards, written at the top of the test, the quiz, the project, or digitally on the first slide of something? Whatever it might be, I've got the standards there, the learner outcomes, and there's a separate score for each one. That's getting more and more specific, and feedback has a bigger bang for the buck. If you're just giving feedback, it gets to something like this. Algebra 1 test, 87. Giving feedback is just a useless waste of time, a waste of planet Earth's oxygen. We can do better. So begin to think about, oh, how does disaggregation help reveal the student's story, revelatory, reveal story, and then how does that help me in my capacity, my focus, I should say, on being specific? Because that's the most helpful feedback as we move forward, not some generic thing. Oh, so every time we see the whales again, it's a shift to another segment as we go through and do this. Here is that first shift as we've been cruising along. When we talk about descriptive feedback, one of the biggest things we've learned is about goal setting, how incredibly motivating this is. Dopamine release. Physiologically, we feel euphoria, a moderate sense of well-being when we set goals, when we monitor our progress towards the goals, and when we achieve the goals. So I want students more invested with online remote instruction. We need to establish goals in math, in science, in coding, in music, in art, not just PE fitness goals, but in learning French and Spanish and German and Chinese. Let's establish a goal mindset. Whoa. So this is some research that talks about the fact that you get goal setting and goal getting as very motivational. Read that full long yellow font down below here in the rectangle. Isn't that kind of how we've described descriptive feedback? Knowing where I am, knowing where the goal is, and what I need to do to close that gap. Incredibly investing. And then take a look at this that we've studied from the work world that I find applies to the classroom as well. That last bullet is classroom research. So that would be primary, middle, and upper school or high school level. Take a look at that last bullet at the very least. Yeah. So there's a lot of power behind this. This is not just, incidentally, if you have time. In the workplace, and again, I've translated this to classrooms, and I agree it holds up. All these elements here are motivating to some degree and various degrees of effectiveness as well. But they all have some kind of positive return in motivational. But one is significantly higher, correlating to really maximizing one's motivation. Can you guess which one it is? A, B, C, D, E, or F? Couple of guesses coming in. E from Denise. Cheer, it makes sense because I was just talking about goals, or A, recognition. Again, all of them are motivating to some degree, but one is clearly more motivating. All right. Survey says, little drum beat wherever you are. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, F. The sense that I am making progress. So how do you make progress visible? Wow, does that happen so readily with descriptive feedback? A lot of people realize we're flooded with books and articles about making progress visible. I mean, there are whole books dedicated just to that. How do I get students to perceive that they are learning? You were once here and now you're here. When you're lost in the daily urgencies, you don't see that growth. By the way, that's the gift principals give teachers and teachers give students. Let me give you the big picture because you're not seeing that. And I just want you to know you've come so far. And then we might talk about what decisions did you make that got you to that point. That's powerful as well. So this is actually my own children as they were in middle school. They're one of the few families whose parents gave us permission to use their photos with an online presentation. At any rate, down below there, you should see that, what can we do with goal setting? Where was I before? Where am I now? So I can make progress visible. And it might be a soccer pitch, soccer field, could be football field. It doesn't really matter, but the ball is moving down the field as you achieve certain things. In scouting, we have merit badges. There's bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. We have confirmation. We have rites of passage. Humans like rites of passage. It's very motivating. And the idea that I want to achieve this, but I'm here, is something that descriptive feedback can provide. This is an example from a wonderful book called Coaching Your Classroom. And I know 3 out of these 4 people listed down below, and they're all just top-notch knowing their stuff. But this is an example of a student setting up goal seeking in a particular subject. It might be something for you to consider where you are. And then Susan Brookhart, who's like the queen, the guru of feedback for so many, me included. And again, I got to have several meals with her at one of the conferences we did in Thailand together. She's just wonderful. But she has this phrase called lighting the way forward. That's the way you should see it. And many of you know Dylan William because he's in Canada and North America and the UK quite a bit, all over. And he's got this idea of feedback that moves learning forward. So very similar. Here is a very short clip of Dylan explaining what he means.
The first strategy we call...
Wait, it wasn't working for hearing me. I got to try it again. There we go.
The first strategy we call providing feedback that moves learning.
It's a little soft. Turn it up.
And people ask us, why did you frame it in that way? Why did you call it feedback? And it's because of what happened in 1998 when before Black and I talked to teachers about most effective forms of feedback. Back in 1998, we pointed out that comments were usually more effective than scores or grades. So to their credit, many teachers followed our advice and started giving rather than scores or grades. Unfortunately, many of the comments the students were receiving were not that helpful. They were along the lines of, this would have been a better piece of work had you done the following things, but you didn't, so it isn't. The problem is that too much feedback is backward looking. The reason that happens is because when teachers see the word feedback, they see the back part and assume that feedback should be the view through the rearview mirror. Actually, feedback should be forward looking. It's the view through the windshield. It's about what's next in your learning. Or perhaps, as even more memorably, as Douglas Reeves once pointed out, it's like the difference between getting a medical and a post-mortem. And too many of our students get post-mortems rather than medicals. So the idea is that feedback should be specifically designed to move learning forward rather than just be looking backwards at how bad the previous work was.
That is so convicting for me. Doug Reeves has become a friend over the years. I highly recommend his work. Is it really a physical exam? Here's your current health status. Or is it merely, and I am admitting this, when I've been returning projects and papers, my feedback has basically been, here is how you're dying, or here's how you died. That's how it comes across. And I stopped. Once I talked to Doug, this is several decades ago, it changed what I did. I now saw assessment as a physical exam. So the idea is, hey, here's your status. Here's how I can improve things. Here's what I'm concerned about. Here's how I take the next steps. It is about the forward windshield, not looking where you once were, the back part, as Dylan William just so beautifully described. Well, one of the things that really helps a lot of students today, notice the color of my hair. So my generation, maybe not so much, but millennials and younger. And some of you listening to me, you're millennials, I know, but all the way down to kids currently in school. You are so much better suited for this. This is just a part of your life. Graphic representation of data. We have found that when you color code or when you represent graphically, there are patterns revealed otherwise not perceived. And we want to make sure that you understand what's going on. So these are different depictions of knowledge of a database, but portrayed graphically. My daughter is just graduated about 4 or 5 years ago in the School of Engineering in GIS, Geographical Information Systems. And we talk about the graphic representation of data completely changes people's thinking and can be extremely motivating. But we see things anew that we never saw before. I'm asking you to consider almost all electronic software for assessing and grading kids can now be represented graphically, not just symbolically. And people kind of wonder, why are you doing it symbolically, like with percentages and letter grades and check marks and things like that? I want to see it kind of all laid out. This might be something you want to consider to make progress visible. I mean, really visible. And that, what we found from Bob Marzano's work, when you do graph student performance against standards or learner outcomes graphically, there's a 26 percentile increase in student performance on outside the school tests on those same subjects. So it might be something you're going to hold on to and explore a little bit more if you're not currently comfortable with that. Then, just again, we're doing a deeper dive here on so many elements. Immediate feedback versus delayed. I don't know if you've noticed, but in the last session, as well as this session, I've never said immediate feedback, and you won't hear me say that. What I will say instead, and I encourage you to say, is this: timely feedback, which means I give feedback when it maximizes the instructional forward step the most. All right, as we focus on that. So I might delay it so things percolate a little bit and nobody's bailing you out. Well, let's just offer one caution. You might have some students who are absolutely struggling right and left. And here you are coming in to express feedback, and they just don't get the thing at all. And you realize, oh my, if I'm giving you feedback in reference to something that you don't even understand originally, then feedback is not the thing to employ. It's not the thing to use right now because they need just basic instruction. 2 different books, let alone the myriad of others. I just wanted to keep it limited, not overwhelm, because there's lots of other ideas here. But 2 different examples from different books I highly recommend, they'll be listed at the end, have said this exact thing. Let me give you a moment to read it. So yeah, we can do better. We can realize, oh, let me not do feedback, even though I know feedback is so powerful. They have to have a critical mass, at least a basic understanding, in order for feedback to be really effective. But now, wonderful experiment by Dan Meyer. I hope many of you know his wonderful work in mathematics. Does great TED Talks. He's head of DEMOS, which is a mathematical learning approach. Highly recommend their work as well. But he ran a series back in his Twitter feed in 2017 that I just thought was fascinating. And what they did was an experiment on delayed versus immediate feedback. And you see the actual citation there. The basic idea was this. There was, like 4 quadrant graphs, graphing, shapes and things. Okay, so edit the equation below so that the blue dots are separated from the red dots. And they were doing it with circles and with parabolas as they're doing this. But the circle one had all this delayed feedback as your experience, as you're going through it. But the parabola one had immediate feedback right away. And what happened as a result, these were adults, these were educators sitting on to feel what it was like. Look at what they noticed. I'll give you a moment to read through at least 2 or 3 of them. Remember, the circle one was delayed. They had to struggle a bit more. Yeah, and if you study the world of retrieval practice, you realize that we want to increase the quality of each practice and interaction session with content by not making it overly familiar and easy to do, by actually making it a bit of a challenge each and every time they do a practice. Oh, so one of the things we realize is that if you're giving immediate feedback, at least in my experience, I've seen students become feedback junkies. They finish something really quick. How is it? Tell me how it is right now. And that's an over dependence on external validation. I only have value in relation to my score, how I did here in relation to others. And we don't want to do that. That's a growing mental illness. It's a grounds for anxiety and all kinds of other issues we don't want to encounter. So I want to make you feel very comfortable facing challenge without being bailed out with the absolute solution or feedback on how you're doing all the time. Does that make sense? I'm hoping that makes sense. So again, James Nottingham, going back to his wonderful work and another one of his books, this is from Clark and Hattie, but I'm going to show you something larger from James's work that really helps. Clark and Hattie, this whole book, Visible Learning Regarding Feedback. Notice the top line, judicious withholding. Now look at the bottom line. Let them wallow in error. So from James Nottingham's book, there is a very popular thing you will see on the internet. You just type in these 3 words, you'll get lots of images, lots of articles and presentations on it. Ready? And it comes from this book. So the Learning Challenge, all right? Got it? Here it is, the Learning Pit. And what we find is we introduce the idea, and then there's time where we facilitate struggle, wallowing in error, without me telling you immediately how you're doing. You got to figure it out. You got to percolate a little bit more. There's a struggle there. And then they own it. They carry it forward, and they're more versatile, more agile with it. They understand it and learn it better. This is something he describes quite a bit in his work, and I'm going to recommend it to you. It might be something for you to consider as you're trying to decide delayed feedback or immediate feedback. So if you're looking at the cognitive science of this, the top article is probably the first go-to. Then the second and the third article about, can I just see kind of the basis of why people would think this way? Delaying your feedback is one of the new movements we're really strongly considering, but you might be sitting there once again going, so how do we know when feedback should be immediate or delayed? And again, that will come from experience primarily, but the read of the room, am I getting vibes verbally, body language, whatever? The kids are becoming overly dependent on just plowing through with trial and error, but not really understanding the math or the writing content or the science or the coding, whatever it is. That's when I need to back off and do more delayed feedback, because the students are obviously needing that way too much. I need them to percolate. And maybe I need to give them some skills on how to struggle. When at first you don't understand something, what are like 10 things you do besides just saying, oh, well, I'll wait for the teacher to do this stuff. And I need to pay attention to that. So we're a little bit beyond the time for that, but it might be a criteria you would consider as to whether or not I do delayed or I do immediate. I would also say that immediate feedback, if there's any sense of danger to the student, absolutely, or doesn't allow him or her or them to proceed to the next thing, which is actually more important, it might be something where you want to give immediate feedback. But I'm always going to be constantly thinking, is there any way I could set up the feedback to not come from me, but the feedback that the student can actually give himself, herself, or themselves? Oh, I could probably do that. Yeah. So the student is taught descriptive feedback techniques, self-monitoring techniques. They don't need to ask anybody else. They know exactly where they are in relation to the goal. That might be something valuable we can do. Then tone. Oh, so how I say it so you actually hear it. That's a goal here. We don't want that defensiveness to come up. And at every single turn, I want to create your agency. You're in charge of your feedback as much as we possibly can. So what do you mean? Well, this is really interesting. I'll give you a moment to read this. This is just back in 2019. So it's a very recent research study. Take a look. Yeah. Now, riffing on off this a little bit, just this mindset, a reminder of a very famous study in 2014. Again, that's fairly recent. But what they did is they worked with these high school students and they gave them feedback on their writings and their reading comprehension and so on. But This half the students, this is the variable group, they were given one more sentence of their feedback. Otherwise, it was the same. I'm giving this feedback because I believe in you. So what they found is those students did better. There was a sense of, I'm not threatened by this. I will hear your critical analysis. I see it as helpful and supportive of me. We're fine. But I want to circle something on here for you. We're not leaving this alone. Ready? Look at your screen. Here it is. A year later, they were actually doing better. What the? Yeah, they really matured a lot. They saw the value. They sought out feedback. This is win-win. So I'm wondering if we could start incorporating something like this in our own work in our classrooms. Yeah, we absolutely can do that. So a reminder from the one back in May, and what we just said orally during this session today, is that judgment inhibits learning. It shuts it down. If you somehow telegraph to me an attribution, that was so patient, that was creative, that was well organized, this is a sorry hot mess, this is sloppy, that kind of thing, those are attributes. That's a form of judgment. If you put a judgment symbol on it, letter grades, percentages, you're shutting down that value we get from descriptive feedback, because now it's about self-preservation. And the brain will do that because we have self-preservation organs. Got it. So again, a slide from back in May. These are all forms of praise or judgment. Praise is fine. That's okay. But that's not really feedback. So if you want to do a praise like, oh, that was awesome, that was great, that's a part of being a community. And we all need cheerleaders. But don't think that that's feedback. None of this is feedback. It's not very specific. It's not helpful. And it's really going to make me want to preserve my ego as I go forward. So we don't want to do that. And we don't want to telegraph, which I already described. And we don't want to be attributional, which is actually from coaching 101. Don't assign an attribute to something. Don't declare it. That is very X, Y, whatever it happens to be. So we're pulling back from this, right? So you could put this another way, and this is back from Jill and James's book. What am I trying to achieve? And the third one, what should I do next? Yeah, those should look familiar. But look at the way they frame the second one. It's not, what do I still need to do? It's, look at the progress I've made so far. I think you could add that in your conversations, and that would be very healthy. Now, good feedback, for a lot of people who describe it, starts out with a positive because you don't want to create that emotional defense. I think that's okay in general. I think your demeanor, disposition, your relationship can create that positive intent already, and the kids don't feel threatened. But if you feel like you need to do that, fine. This is an example from Hillman and Stalitz, that book, Coaching Your Classroom, we've already discussed, starting with a comment of strength. Now, here's an example. I'm not assigning attribute. I might say this. Hey, I noticed you used the majority of the techniques I described and taught yesterday. And as a result, it really made me want to read your paper. Thank you for that. Now, that was a positive, but I didn't say well organized, which is a form of judgment. I'm pointing out something specific you did that was constructive, was positive, and I'm pointing out its impact on somebody. That, great. That's a wonderful form of feedback. Point and describe. But if I said, yeah, that was just excellent, that was an A+ introduction. Yeah, that's judgment, man. And the student is already moving into, I need to protect myself for what he says next and other things down the road. And also that teacher is very judgmental. It's a threatening thing. It's not helpful. So I'm saying be cautious. And I'm saying we really want to find out, where could the student get validation for their work? And I'm going to suggest that you try your very best to rechannel it from other places. For example, if a student does something in your class that is used in another subject area, another class, that's validating for this stuff. This connects. It has purpose. How about this? They do something in your class and another person finds it valuable in their work. That's validating. How about this? They write a letter to you explaining how their work, their effort matches the exemplar. Here, maps perfectly. That's validating. Here's another example. They do something in your class, they learn whatever it is, and it's valuable to somebody else in another class. Somebody else uses that and there's a class. That's really cool. How about this? A professional in the field actually comments, this is actually well done. Somebody is on, that's validating. There's lots of other places for validation other than us. And if it's always us, that becomes a problem. They're overly dependent on that. We can do better. So that tone, your topic sentence is weak. That's a signing attribute, isn't it? It's a form of judgment. How could I use my questioning and my coaching mindset to change that? How about this? So here the student is given some choice, some options. There's that autonomy, that sense of agency. Here's another. Students need the knowledge that teachers care about them, like them, and the way we phrase things. I need to honor what you bring to learning's table. And if I'm dismissive of what you bring to it, or I'm just didactic and authoritarian, it's going to shut it down. We can change that. So the words used totally affect it. And what Susan Brookhart found in her research is that teachers often do this positive feedback with good students, but with poor students, they just tell them what to do. And poor students need this perhaps more than anybody else. So consider this, things not to do. Check it out. Now, a preferred way of doing it would be these right here. Don't worry, we're coming up to a 5-minute stretch break in just a moment. Yeah. So notice how the teacher is creating agency in the student. Between the first and the second examples, give them a read. You get to own the direction this takes. Again, it's a little bit from Instructional Coaching 101. So a reminder, we're going to comment, and this is from the May session, we're going to comment on your decisions and their impact, not the quality of the work, because that's too slippery a slope into judgment. So I noticed you did this as a result of that. Does that make sense? We talked about that. And then this is a wonderful video. It's very short with Ron Berger again, but a very different way to kind of take a look at this. Although it's complementing and reinforcing what we've discussed so far, that I think you'll find very helpful, and you can even share it with students. And then a slide on what not to do. And boy, I am guilty of all of them, and so many other ideas when we come back. So if you look at your watches and add 4 minutes to them, start walking back. So in 5 minutes, you're ready to come on back. Take your bio break at this point. I'll stay right here and answer questions as you have them. Thanks. We'll see you in about 5 minutes. And you can unmute to talk, or you can just talk via the chat box. But take a stretch, get something to eat or drink.
Rick, I just thought of a question.
Okay.
So is it possible that sometimes like students want you to give them direction, like more concrete direction? Because I know in some conversations with students, because I'm asking them questions instead of giving them a direct response, they will say, well, Miss Wu, what would you do? And that usually is a signal that they're wanting something more concrete and specific because they don't know what to do.
Oh, I agree completely. I will also remind all of us that that's indoctrinated, that I would like a bailout, please. And we don't want to do that. However, if it's becoming dysfunctional, could I somehow give a nugget of something and then follow-up question and begin to see, oh, look at that. Absolutely, you were able to solve that on your own. Yeah, we can totally do that. And so I appreciate the question, because I've struggled with that my whole life as a teacher as well, is how much do we give them and what if they come begging? And then it's interesting too, in high school and middle school in particular, if you're in adolescence, you're looking for role models of how to respond yourself. And you're going to try on that clothing to see if it works for you as well. And so they might say, well, what would you say in a politically heated conversation? Or what would you say, what would you do if this was just not working for you? And what you might do is say, can I just give you a list of maybe 5 or 6 things and you choose the one you want to try? Yeah, that'd be fine. In terms of what I would do, it might be one thing this week and something different next week, but it really depends at what's at stake, the type of purpose for which I'm writing, the intended audience, all kinds of factors come to play. Well, you're very comfortable assimilating multiple factors. That's a sign of maturity. But high school and middle school, they're just learning to assimilate multiple factors to affect the whole of the decision. So I'm going to be mindful of that as I move forward. I'll give you a little template from which you can launch. You can do this or you can do this if you like to do that, if they need something that structured. But eventually I'm trying to wean them off. So it's kind of like I'm successively minimizing my cueing system, like we might do with students who struggle with executive function. First, I'm very overt, follow the template, do these directions, and then I pull back and say, more and more choices, more and more choices. Now add another factor. Look at you flying solo. I'm a complete waste of your time to be with you, which is my goal, is to become a waste of their time. As they work with me, that's what Oscar Wilde reminds us, the goal of any teacher is to put himself out of a job. That's my goal, is to move you from dependence to independence as much as I can. That's my initial response. Is that kind of what you thought I was going to say?
Yes, I think so. I just always feel like I never can seem to win, because if I don't
Oh,
give
yeah.
any judgment, then it's almost like they start asking me for the judgment.
Right, because we want to be safe. We want to know that we're okay. And so what we need to do is this: give them the tools to figure out if they're okay on their own. To self-monitor is the number one thing in all the meta-analyses of John Hattie's work and all that research. So the students may not feel confident at figuring out where they are. And so that would be the role of the teacher. Let's take a look. Here's an example of a well-written introductory paragraph. Here's yours. Now, is yours kind of like that, using the same techniques? Yeah, point it out to me, please. Okay, here's like that, but here does that. And then I have a sentence that ties it all up and really is compelling and brings it in. And I could just say, yeah, I agree. But they did the heavy lifting as much as possible. Is there ever a time where, again, it's so dysfunctional, I just say, yeah, you're on the right track. I'm really proud of you. Yeah, absolutely, because we need a community. But for most of the time, I'm going to tell them, yeah, I want you to do the heavy lifting. Never work harder than your students. All those books by Robin Jackson, spot on. If I am the one that assesses and analyzes something and judges it, I'm learning a lot. The goal is that the student does the learning. I already know it. At least I hope so. All right.
Great,
Hope that helps
thanks.
anybody listening. But it is, our 5 minutes is over, so I'm going to continue back after your stretching and your water as we do this, because we have a lot more to do here. Let me just close off the little matrix I had created of all your faces, those of you who chose to show. Let's take a look now at this very short video with Ron Berger that really speaks volumes. And it's a really good way to frame what you do with your students. Let's take a look. Again, for some reason, it's just not going. There we go. No. I got to figure this out. There we go.
I used to have about 10 rules for critique, but nobody could remember them. So finally, after using 10 forgettable rules for 10 years or whatever, I got critiqued on my presentations and on my work, which was good, sharp, smart critique that enabled me to cut that down to the 3 most important things: be kind, be specific, be helpful. And there are certainly other pointers you could give someone. Use I statements, start with a positive before you use critical things, ask things as a question rather than a definitive statement. There's lots of guidelines that used to be part of my 10. But now when I walk into a kindergarten, kids will say, oh, I know you, you're the kind, specific, helpful guy, right? You're that we use those rules. People really do remember those rules. It's very simple. But to see them in practice, imagine, Michelle, that you're in a ballet class as a kid or as an adult, and you're in a position. The teacher's going to walk by you, maybe put her hand gently on your shoulder and say, Michelle, your shoulders are just right. That's exactly right. It's being kind. But look at your back leg. Okay, do you see, if you could move that back leg just a little bit more to get yourself in a line here, think of how different that's going to, now try that. See how different that is? Okay, concentrate on that next time you take that position. And then she walks on to the next person. And then you think, I felt good about that. She was complimentary, but I know exactly what I was doing wrong. It was specific and helpful. And the next time I'm in that position, I'm going to be just right here. Like, that's the model in my mind. Can we be kind, specific, and helpful all the time and giving each other those pointers, which allow us to make those small adjustments to get better?
Oh, that worked out really well and very similar to what we heard in the very opening video. So look what we're not supposed to do. We want to be very specific. We don't want to be generalized. We don't want to talk about character. And we want the students, we're talking about the work, right? All kinds of different things. We stick to the agreed upon focus area. You see the comments there? Let's take a look. And I just am so embarrassed. I've done every one of these in my career. And these are the no-nos. I wish I could just draw an X through all of them, and maybe I'll do that in future presentations. But as I post these up here, take a look and see if you recognize anything you've ever said or written on student papers and projects and tests, and let's start avoiding them, all right? So like, look how smart you are. There we are talking about your character. Don't want to do that. Lots of different ideas. I'll put them all up here. I'll give you a few moments to read through them on your own. Too general. Not focused on the agreed upon stuff. Yeah, so we might actually just walk over and say, hey, on what would you like feedback? Rather than me saying, I want it to be this. Now, can I ask questions to kind of guide them to what I want them to say? Yes, I'm not above manipulation at any point. However, I'm going to try to get them to arrive at that, or at least to augment what they want also with what I'm doing. So maybe we can do both. But these are, hey, don't do these. So if you recognize any of yourself in these, kind of keep that as a notation. Maybe even put it on your computer screen next to your camera. Don't do this, if at all possible, to try to change those habits. They're not helpful, and they immediately create self-preservation and not listening. I have to somehow protect myself. We don't want to do that. So this is a reminder from some other sessions I've done that stress, which kids are feeling right now because of the pandemic and the loss of normalcy, but it was already on the rise. I was looking at research in December and January, and we're already talking about the stresses that were increasing. But a reminder that stress is really a sense that you lack control. And when students feel like they have agency, which is so beautifully accomplished through descriptive feedback techniques, we develop the self-efficacy. I'm empowered to act upon this. I'm allowed to act upon these new insights and so on, that the stress goes down and they're willing to engage. And many of you know that chronic stress is that where you're just totally exposed to all this stuff all the time. And it creates allostatic load. It depresses your capacity to engage, all kinds of things going on that we don't want going on. So this is where the amygdala kind of, which is fight, flight, or freeze. That's the organelle, the green egg-shaped thing in the diagram to the right. This is what it does to the brain. And is there anything there that it applies to school learning? Yeah, pretty much all of it. Absolutely. So we do have to be mindful about stress level. To respond to that in a very constructive manner, not just leave it to chance or, oh, well, shape up. We can do better. And so toward that end, here are just 4 pieces of advice I would give you. One is really stay focused on 2 or 3 areas alone. That speaks to the cognitive load theory. Our working memory can really only process that amount. And if you are stressed out, that actually takes up room and where you progress or process things. So if I'm stressed out and I'm dealing with that stress, that anxiety, there is less room for me to actually process academic stuff. It literally is that kind of balance. So we have to be very careful with that and not overwhelm. That means I'm not going to give you feedback on 6 and 7 things in the paper and in the lab, in the write-up. I'm going to say, look, we're going to focus on scientific method. We're going to focus on conclusion writing on this. So let me just see your layout. I'm not going to go give feedback on, hey, you screwed up on the data presentation, or that was not a hypothesis. We're not talking about hypothesis now, so stay focused. The second one there is we identify strengths ahead of time. Remember, we're trying to make it as safe place as we can. The third one is that Goldilocks principle. And this, again, comes from experience, but basically your goal is this. I give you enough feedback or help you get enough feedback so you know what to do, but not so much I've done it for you. Does that make sense? That difference, that discernment? And then every time when I'm trying to frame things or do things, how am I building the student's agency, autonomy in this, not me just demanding and being, again, didactic or authoritarian about this feedback and what you need to do in the next steps of your learning. I'm trying to get them to own it and make the choices. They'll commit to it. They'll be more motivated too when they perceive that they are their own agent in their learning. So I'm going to suggest, and it's beyond the time that we've got right now. I do this slide when I have people all day for this, but I'm going to suggest that after this session, you look through the handout and you try to identify at least 8 different operational principles that we've discussed that you, again, can tape up next to your camera lens. So it's there if you're doing remote instruction, or in your lesson plan book, if you're doing everybody in the classroom, whatever it might be, that are reminders. And you keep it there for the remainder of the school year. And periodically, like every 2 weeks, so it's twice a month, you actually read it out loud, just so you're mindful of it, instead of it becoming intellectual white noise and it just fades in the clutter of the background and you never really pay attention to it. Or maybe you tell somebody else about your principles of feedback just to get you talking about it, which moves it to the front part of your internal editor. You reference it real time while you're working. So put it someplace for easy reference, if at all possible. And now we're next to the next segment. Now, this is a reminder. Some of these, there are some new ones here, but some of these are reminders of what we did back in May. So we turn that cube very quickly. This is just like a teaser, guys. We elaborated so much more. So I've got 4 squares here. Ready? Lower left-hand corner, take a look. We want to give feedback so the student enters into his own learning, not just to justify the grade. We don't want CYA feedback. Cover your beep. I'm -5, you didn't have that. +2, you had that. That's you justifying the grade. That is not feedback like we're talking about here. Second one here. Yeah, scores alone from Ruth Butler's research doesn't work. It actually does harm, makes kids complacent. But scores with comments, B+, very good. D-, again, sorry, hot mess, terrible. That's just you venting. That doesn't help. But there's a caveat on that. Don't worry, coming up. Then what Ruth Butler found, and a lot of other researchers, is that comments alone, and it had to be a specific type of comment, and I'll show you examples of that coming up, really work the best. The caveat, latest research, we have found that yes, you can have scores and you could have descriptive feedback going with it, not just venting comments, and it actually turns out to have a positive impact. That was that whole slide in a nutshell. But then, is that okay to do comparison with other students? No, that would be highly inappropriate and it's not good feedback at all. So you don't want to set up comparison except comparing one's work to the evaluative criteria, to the goal, whatever that might be. And then a reminder that we're mirrors. We reflect back to kids what they did without the judgment. So we're just reflecting back. You did this, you did that, this was included, whatever. You see how there's you have no idea if I think that's good or bad. You're just a mirror. Got it? All right. Wow, look how fast we did this slide. Let's turn the block here. Here are examples of feedback from that last session. The green font is just saying what you did, And the white font is the impact of that. So this is point and describe. You did this, this, and this. As a result, it was in alignment with this, or was out of alignment, or this was achieved. Is that what you wanted? This is a really good form of descriptive feedback. And I had a variety of subject areas there, and that's teacher to student. But you look in the lower right-hand corner, this is student doing the same thing. And they're very capable of this, even young ones. You'll see examples there, but now the student is pointing out what he or she or they did and the impact. So 2 examples of those. If you want to look through them, fine, we can talk about it. And then I gave you one with a teacher. I could say your lesson was engaging. That's not really helpful. It doesn't do anything to add to my repertoire to improve where I am. And it's not specific about what I did, it's specific about its impact. So one of the things we did last time, but I'll just ask you to consider it now, try it yourself over and over with things around your house, things in the classroom, with colleagues, just with me right now as a presenter. Point out what I do with these slides. All the slides I've done so far, or the way I'm talking to you, or whatever it is. And it could be stuff that I need to improve. It could be stuff I'm doing pretty well. And remember, you frame it like this. Rick, I notice you, and you say the things I'm doing. So you're reviewing previous material, or your slides are using colorful graphics, or your voice is excited and you seem to be enthusiastic. As a result, and you tell me how that affects you. That means you're pointing out a specific technique, you're adding to my repertoire, right? But you're also affirming, look, it results in the positives you are seeking. Or reverse it. Rick, you're talking way too fast, and you're going through all these techniques so fast and the slides so fast, I'm missing some of it, and it's making me frustrated. Once again, you're pointing out specific techniques I'm doing as a presenter, and you're pointing out how it doesn't align with my goals. I'm going to hear that, and I'm going to go, oh, let me slow down, all these other things. I'm going to change what I do, but I will hear you, and I will internalize that and improve as a presenter. Do you see the difference here? Yeah. So the idea is that you try it out, and when you feel the positives, you're way more likely to do it with your students. So maybe with you and a colleague, taking a look at each other's lesson plans, or specifically, if you want to put it in the chat box right now to help me out, that's fine. Affirming things I do well, give me suggestions. But this is point and describe. Shifting gears again, you could do this with your own curriculum. Absolutely. So think about some students' work. Maybe you have some students' work right now that was sent back to you digitally, or you gathered in the class from last week or this week. And then just, you have to write in the paper if you're not feeling strong and competent at this right now. I understand, first steps, smaller steps, but maybe to one side, I notice you as a result, blah, blah, blah. And do like 3 or 4 of those. Start developing that repertoire of phrasing things, but try it out. Anybody have one they can think about right now with specific work that they know their students are working on right now? And they could just do an example hypothetical for us out loud. Doesn't matter the subject, and it doesn't matter the age group. Grade 1s, grade 12s, doesn't matter. Of course, you can put it in the chat box.
Hi there.
Yay.
I teach grade 6, and we're working on story endings. And so when you specifically give them, we had 6 different examples of endings. So we were trying out how you can end with dialogue. So gave an exemplar, listened to a story that had it, and then asked them to try to do that with their own work. And, the feedback then is, oh, did you put quotations around that, or, just saying what you noticed about it, and not having them rewrite the story. It's just an
or just observational.
Mm-hmm. So that really seems to work, of like the exemplar and then practice.
Well, the question, I'm sorry for interrupting, Jen. The question would be, what is your evaluative criteria? What do you want them to learn from ending a story with dialogue? That's a strong way to end a story? Is that what you're saying?
We're working on powerful and purposeful endings.
Okay. So then you
alternate ways to finish up a story that they've created.
Instead of saying, and then I woke up.
Right. Or
and it was all a dream.
Thanks for reading my story. I hope you liked it.
Yeah, exactly. So what I would have to ask you if I was coaching you on this is talk to me a little bit more about what the evaluative criteria is for a strong ending. What are some of those things you want to get across to students? And then in the feedback, if you were to take this structure, it would be something like, I noticed you used this. And as a result, this is how I felt ending your story, reading your story, as a reader. It gave a powerful punch at the end or something for me to think about or whatever it might have been in your criteria. But the idea is they're giving feedback that's actionable and that they see without me assigning attribute, like it was a good ending. It was something very specific you did that resulted in a positive outcome. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So practice a couple of those, just write them off to one side. And by the way, any of you who want to practice this and send me the actual through email, I would love to reflect on it with you. I love doing that. I'm not in the classroom, so I miss it. I know, okay, if it's just I don't miss grading 185 of the same thing, which was my student load, but I do miss the back and forth. So know that I'm okay with that if you ever want to do that. Thank you, Jen. That was awesome. Oh, sorry, but that was supposed to be camaraderie building. I know it was assigning attribute, but it really was good. All right, let's take a look at some of the other stuff. These are techniques. This is one I've talked about many times. What are you supposed to be learning and where are you in relation to that? How are you going to close the gap? You could have kids write a letter. We talked about another example we talked about. There's point and describe. And then down below in that lower right-hand corner is the most common definition of descriptive feedback and a technique people employ. I also talked about the fact that I never, ever edit students' work. When I taught math, when I taught government, PE, English, reading, all the sciences I've taught, not one time do I edit. Because if I edit, I learn a lot. So I write a dot or cartoon eyeballs at the end of the line or the geographic region of the math problem or lab write-up or the computer code. Totally can do that where there's an issue. And then I train kids to find the issue if they know there's one there, but it's not identified, because they should do the heavy lifting and they will own that mistake. They will never make that mistake again. But if I correct it, it's passive. It's not active. And along those same lines, a reminder of watching, you should watch this video. It's the idea that you would highlight different portions, but not say why you highlighted it. And the student would have to talk to other classmates and the teacher and figure out why that was highlighted. And you could have different colors for different elements you want to highlight as you do that. The video there is a pre-algebra class, but I have to tell you, I show it to kindergarten teachers, I show it to PE teachers, college professors, all in between, just like I mentioned in the other video, and they find value to it. So think about this. You don't want to bail them out. You want them to be in the learning pit to percolate. This is a great way to give feedback that gets them to laser focus in, but you don't actually give everything away and bail them out as they do that. And then a reminder, one of their techniques was here's what, so what, now what? You'll see, if you look through that graph, you'll see lots and lots of cool ideas, very similar to what we've talked about today. And then a reminder is the last technique from the last session that I'll share with you tonight or this afternoon is on, you create an item analysis chart where they've done the quiz, they've done the test, whatever, and they see the markups on it, whatever that might be, but then they do the analysis. And you can put whatever you want at the top of the columns. Oh, it's lovely. Whatever you want them to mediate the interaction with that. And then based on that, they write a letter of reflection and action with 3 parts. On what did I do well? And what I'm still struggling? And what can I suggest to learn this properly? And you might need to give them a few hints about, choose from a menu of options. You both sign a letter, but they do the critical error analysis and they do, hey, what are my next steps? They will own it. If I say, here's all your wrongness, and here's what you're now going to do to correct your wrongness, they won't own it. We talked about this in the last session. I also did a series of videos, well, two videos on YouTube, and they'll be listed later in your handout, where I talk about these techniques in more detail through the animated hand drawing video scribe software. So you're welcome to go look at that and even share those videos with parents and with students if you want them to learn the techniques as well. But now, some new ideas. Many of you are familiar with this one. I used to think, but now we think is a wonderful way for students to see, I am making progress. I used to be here, but now I am here. Wonderful. I do that one a lot. I do it for teacher PD. You could do this with descriptive feedback. I used to think this about descriptive feedback, but now I think this, and do like 5 of those after we're done here. Or maybe this weekend when we reflect back on this Thursday presentation to you. might be something to consider. It's invaluable. And by the way, when you do those out loud, you give permission to other people to revise their thinking in light of new evidence, which we all need. We all need that boost. It's very energizing. Now, examples from students in the classes over the years of that I used to think, but now I think, here's how it applies to content. Take a look at least one or two. Wow, it's showing remarkable growth just by doing this. And you can have young kids do that. I used to think this about water droplets as you're teaching their water cycle, but now I think this. That's so exciting. They can just articulate it in whatever way they articulate. Then some additional ideas for self-monitoring. Chris Tovani is a friend. I highly recommend her books. She really writes wonderfully well about reluctant readers, people who struggle. And she writes for Stenhouse and Heinemann and others. I recommend her work. It's great. But a lot of kids don't know when they don't know, and they don't know when they do know. And we want kids to self-monitor. So she's got these questions here that I kind of developed and I taped onto the students' desks, like you might have the handwriting, cursive strips and primary desks. Yeah, I still believe in handwriting. I know, I'm an old fart, sorry. But at any rate, the idea that how do I know that my summary is good? Or how do I know that I comprehend? I want students to do that. So that's one example of that. Then Likert scales, put an X where you really are following in relation to this particular material. And then video footage. We actually film students and then we sit down with them and analyze what was successful, what was not, what would you change and do differently. These are just forms of self-monitoring. And then I love reading notations. You can help the kids come up with the symbols they want to use, but these are my go-tos. And what the students do is it's non-consumable text. We write very lightly if we have to. If it's consumable text, they can just write all over it. But we have icons we click onto on websites and we want things to download. So we're used to like having icons or emojis for things, all right? So now they go through in their reading or in the math work, the lab work, doesn't matter what they're doing. And they just make these reactions to everything, which actually forces them to read every single word. Good thing. And they do all this stuff. I understand. I agree with. I disagree with. A CL is a claim the author's making, and then evidence 1, 2, 3, and 4. I used to say SD, supportive detail, but I was teaching health class and high school and middle school children. And of course, I would say, now, what were your SDs for this? And it sounds too close to STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. So I stopped. I switched to EV. So evidence 1, evidence 2, evidence 3. There's a little 1, 2, or 3 after each one. But now we can have a conversation back in class or by remote instruction and say, so what was the author's claim? How many claims did he or she make? Well, how many pieces of evidence were there? Where's the evidence? What part do you not understand? And what they're doing is they're just scanning for the icons. And that's great. If I never had them do the notations, they get so bored and it's so much more work. They're going to look through every single paragraph to trying to find the one part they didn't understand. It's not worth it. They'll just sit there, hope you won't call on them, make up an excuse if you do call on them. So we don't want to do that. So reading notation is a really powerful way to monitor where you are and to make a personal response. But I love annotations. I can't tell you how many times students who come back from college saying, when you were teaching us annotations, this is so driving me nuts. It was so not worth it. I didn't understand it. But in college, I am now annotating just on my own based on what I learned from you. And I'm the only one in class who's like remembering the stuff, who's thinking more, could participate in class. So thank you, even though I hated it when I was with you, sort of. It's a backhanded compliment, but I'll take that. So I'm going to suggest that you have kids interact as a way to self-monitor as you go through that. And then this is a wonderful one, again, from Garnett and Mandy's book, Coaching the Classroom, about where you're trying to respond. I think you can adapt this nicely to math and science and other ones as well, but this is for writing. But basically, I'm filling out a form where I'm telling you orally about telling you what you like, a strength, ask a question, give an actionable suggestion. But then the writer says, what comes next for you? The writer ultimately owns it, the author. This might be a simple format that kind of gets you started with monitoring progress towards a larger goal. Now, reflective coaching. I started out our time together I started talking about reflective coaching, instructional coaching, and cognitive coaching. I am telling you, I wrote a whole article on this. I'm so excited about this. I do whole day trainings just on reflective coaching, which is like instructional coaching, but my version of all of that. Know that the ideas we get from coaching one another, mentoring a colleague, for example, work really well when giving descriptive feedback with students. So I'm not going to sit here and train you on cognitive coaching and instructional coaching and all of that. What I'm remind you is that in all instructional, cognitive, or reflective coaching, we're moving towards self-efficacy of the other person, right? I need to get you there. You're owning this stuff. So what I have for you are some of the basic tips that I tell teachers to do that we do with each other that you can do with students. And again, we're not going to spend the time on it. If you would like to have me just train you on reflective coaching, we can totally do that. Many of you already know this. I get it. One of my concerns is that many schools will have an instructional coach that knows this, but the teachers themselves haven't been trained. And I'm saying, hey, can we change that around? Everybody should be trained in it. So I gave you a few slides on the tips, the insights, some of the stuff you already know. I'm just affirming it. It's validating. But wait, I want to stop when we get to the coaching questions. If we have time at the end, I'll come back and show you this video. It's really fun. But right now we'll move on. And I want to show you those questions starting here. So Susan, can you let us know about the Google Doc?
Yes, it should have been sent out this afternoon to all participants, Rick.
That's great. So what I did is I took these slides and I sent those out to everybody via Susan, right? So now it's on a Google Doc. The first two slides you see here are general questions for giving feedback. Don't worry, there's another segment coming up. What I'm going to ask you to consider doing, and it works really well. And when I coach teachers, with them long term, it works well. I'm giving you a testimony, and it worked for me. Is that you don't want to have a long list of questions on a legal pad, and you're like looking for it in the spur of the moment as you're talking. Oh, okay. How does that align with your original goal? Terrible acting, right? You want it to be much more natural. So I'm going to ask you to do this because of, again, cognitive load theory. I'm going to remind you, why don't you memorize 5 out of this whole big list? Here's the second slide. Ooh, there's more. And here's a couple more here on this slide. That's a lot of stuff. Now, here's a whole bunch dedicated to assessment and grading in general that can be used when you use feedback as well. Wow, there's a lot. And if you see the Google Doc, you will see a lot. Memorize 5 and use them for 3 or 4 weeks. Really get into them. Tip of your tongue that you need to come right up. One of my favorites is tell me more about that. Is there anything to that? And then I love those. Those are some of my go-tos. How does that match with your goal? What would you do differently next time? Now, do you see that I'm asking questions to which I don't necessarily know the answer? And that's actually a cool thing. A lot of times teachers convey through body language and vocal and intonations that there is an answer you should say. And students get defensive, like, okay, stop fishing. Just tell me what you want me to say. Yeah, they're that perceptive. They might not say that, but they're thinking it. So you can ask questions to which you don't have the answer. That's fine. That's actually really good. But the idea is you keep asking questions, ultimately helping them move towards the goal that you do have for them. But they help direct that process, obviously. Well, after 3 or 4 weeks, memorize another 5 and use them plus the original 5. Now you have 10 for 3 to 4 weeks. Try to do them as many times as you can. Now you have 10. At the end of that 3 or 4 weeks, that second one, do another 5. And you repeat the process until you have this go-to 15 or one more round, a go-to 20 that are on your fingertips. And it might take you a whole year to develop. That's really okay. But I find this is much more natural and you feel so much more fortified and prepared to enter into a descriptive feedback relationship, a coaching relationship with students. So the reason I'm giving you this, and I'm skipping all the insights, is we're not doing a session on instructional or reflective coaching. We're doing it on the questions here that really help you do your coaching. So I gave you all of these. They're available to you in the Google Doc and here in the handout. Then 2 slides of really good resources on that instructional coaching and cognitive coaching that will give you more ideas, tons of ideas to which we've already alluded. They're here for you. I wrote a couple of or 3 articles you see listed down there that might help in a lot of this approach. So take a look at those if you find them valuable. All my articles are for free and they're all on the website, rickwormley.com. So just think about this. We'll walk through it. I'm feeling like some of you are a little bit hesitant to offer some contributions right now because you're just kind of getting aware of this, or maybe you're working on other things simultaneously while listening to me. But if you were to try it, consider. This is from a place in the States here from 2013, New York State ELA Common Core test. These are released items and responses from students. But we would sit down here and we would practice this with each other once we shared descriptive feedback techniques. And we would read this and we would literally, using student work, say, here's the feedback I probably would write or I would say to this student. So if we had more time, I would say, let's read through this. Well, the problem with this is you haven't decided what the evaluative criteria is for success. So feedback is totally vacuous. It's a waste of time. So we would have to start out talking about what's the evaluative criteria and then what feedback would we give? Here's one from Alberta. Yeah, learnalberta.com has some samples there on their website. Here we've got, which looks like closer to being evaluative criteria, at least it's the prompt. Compare your home, village, or city to the place you live now. Describe things that are the same and different. It doesn't give any other evaluative criteria for that, just what you need to include. But we would have to talk about that ahead of time. What grade level is this? What are we looking for? And then as you read this, practice with each other. What feedback would you give? Here's one. It's a math class, and the student has to explain his writing, or excuse me, his mathematical calculation through writing. So read through this one. This is one is where I'm really going to stop for a moment. And I want to see if at least one of you in the chat box or just unmute yourself would consider a feedback phrase you might use here. How do we phrase it? What kind of feedback? On what kind of elements do we want to give feedback? Let me give you a moment to read the student's description of how you solve this problem. All right. Anybody see an initial phrasing or element on which it probably needs a comment? Well, some of you are doing this. I got to figure out in my mind's eye what's going on, and I have to figure out if the math is correct. And if you read through this, he actually made a mathematical mistake, including a number that should not be used and missing out on the proper number that should be used. So he's getting to 360 inches and it shouldn't be that. Oh my. But 3 full pipes, that actually is the correct answer, but it's not for the reason he gave. The calculation is off. So how might we frame the feedback? So we might just literally say orally, walk me through this. Talk to me where you got the 36 and the 10, or the 12 inches and the 10, or the 360 inches. Walk through that. Draw a diagram. And when somebody explains their thinking and realizes the error of their ways, they're way more likely to accept it. If I point out, you use that number instead of that number, they get defensive. Anybody want to try phrasing a comment? A feedback initial conversation? You can use any of the ones I've shared with you, like, I noticed you. Remember, you're just a mirror reflecting back. Or if you want to, go back and use some of the questions we just did in reflective coaching. Tell me more about, and you fill in. A reminder too, this gets easier to summon the more you practice. So we're talking about, in the world of cognitive science, rehearsal. Rehearse doing this. And it's really cool if you can do it in front of one of your teacher colleagues. And maybe you've told them a little bit about the principles of good descriptive feedback. And you might say this and go, would that be helpful to students, or would that shut them down? Or something like that. Or you write like 5 of these and you just kind of play with it until it matches or is alignment with the principles we've discussed. But the idea is that you practice. Wait, you can do it with math, or excuse me, science as well. So we might look at this and see how the teacher was writing back in an interactive notebook and decide, do we like what she was saying there in terms of what we know about successful feedback, or are we finding it a little off-putting? Well, I got to tell you, most of what she did there was actually pretty decent. But there's a couple of places I might make a suggestion to improve things. But then I have to say to the teacher, what kind of question would I ask the teacher to get the teacher to kind of see, oh, you could phrase that differently? Yeah, it takes practice. Wait, we can do it with videos of teachers. There are tons of teachers online who are doing stuff. Let's just go back and click on that. This is a teacher doing classroom management. That's not very cool.
Okay, time's up. Have a seat.
But I will tell you, that teacher was modeling something that was supposed to be excellent. That was a teacher of the year demonstrating proper classroom management. And I disagree with a lot of what he was doing. Oh no. So how do we give feedback to one another? You learn so much about giving feedback to students when you do this with each other. So I'm going to encourage you to do that. And if you do hypotheticals from YouTube or other locations online, it's safe. Nobody's feelings are hurt because those people aren't even a part of your faculty. That's actually okay. You know, don't worry about that, but you want the rehearsal ahead of time as you do it. I'm a little bit concerned about time, so I'm going to push ahead. But if you want to give some examples for that one science one or math one, feel free. Absolutely, we can do that. Remember what we talked about. If you're going to do descriptive feedback, it's a waste of time unless there's action. So this is a slide that we used once before, but just to remind you, or please, if you saw it before, even now, could you reread the second twisted slide there? There you go. Students will enjoy and value the feedback as long as they're given the chance to take action on it. So I am asking you, yeah, you want to get into redos and retakes as much as you can. And just to remind you of this, and I would be glad to send you chapter 16 from my book, Fair Isn't Always Equal, second edition, that really outlines this in much more depth, much more specific detail. So you can do this without going insane, okay, as you do that. But here's what I'm reminding you. We're talking about redos and retakes, so there's hope. And that means they get full credit, not partial credit, which is knowingly lying to students. So on the left, I have done all of these mistakes in my career. See if you recognize yourself in it. I'm like giving half a point for each problem you go back and correct. You're knowingly lying and distorting the truth of their accurate proficiency if they do demonstrate higher than 50% quality in their proficiency. So lots of different ideas there. We're talking about, yeah, engendering that hope and reminding ourselves that smaller scales serve us better. And if you have gradations or degrees of aptitude, like D's, F's, F minuses, and so on, like many schools do have that. I apologize for saying it. I'm just stunned I have to say that, but unfortunately they are there. So many gradations and possibilities of failure, but a tiny little moment that where you could demonstrate hope, it becomes a problem. So most schools have 3 or 4 levels and then one catch-all level, whether it's a moral or immoral reason. And they just call that not yet or in progress or something along those lines, no evidence presented, which means no credit given either as you do that. And a reminder in all of this that the only reason people can't redo a final project or final test is because somebody made that policy, not because it was educationally justified. You know, for simple clarity, sanity saving at that moment. So if you're really living up to the promise of, I teach so that you learn, some kids might need 17 times of doing something. And some kids might get it in the first time or the second or third, and we're good. We're copacetic. The goal is, were you hired to teach or hired to play? Gotcha. And I love that quote down below. The best geologists in the world is one who's seen the most rocks. It really serves us well. We want constant iteration, critique and feedback. We revise in light of that, and we're a little bit better next time. Then I get critique and feedback on what I did. We revise in light of that. We're a little bit better next time. This is how anybody in every single field becomes competent in those fields. So I do a ton of work with technical colleges, universities, and technical high schools. So welding schools, nursing programs, HVAC, electricians, plumbers, paralegals. I work with all these people, accounting schools, right? And they often push back. Oh, wait, if they know they can redo, they don't study the first time. And I'm calling buffalo bagels on that. That's my polite Virginia term. Yeah, no, that's not what happens. They won't study the first time. Yeah, they will study, because redos and retakes is a lot more work on the other side. So, and again, the chapter 16 on redos from my book would explain that. So let me send that to you before you kind of dismiss it outright. So I do respond back that how did any of us become competent, which is just what I went through there. And then a reminder, especially when I'm teaching nurses about how to run intravenous lines. Well, not I'm teaching that, but I'm telling them about the assessment of that, is that there is a difference in the learning experience that is separate from the post-certification, now you're in the field expectation. And to demand complete certified performance when you're just morphing insecure human, learning it the first time without the reiterations and the feedback, you're not going to learn it very well when you do that. And that's a form of abuse, really. And it's not supported by anything we know in adult, so andragogy or pedagogy, children teaching. None of that is supported. Oh, so we have to kind of get into it. And just a gentle reminder that if you don't allow students to redo after getting the feedback and the critique, you said 3 things that are unacceptable. This assignment had education of value, it was completely skippable. Then why'd you assign it? Second one, it's okay if you don't do it. No, the consequence for not doing your work is doing your work. I will haunt your nightmares. I will not give up on you so readily as you are giving up on yourself. And the most heinous, yeah, you don't have to learn this. That's the soft bigotry of low expectations. No, and you know what? If I work with a public school division, not a private school, I can't decide the curriculum. So I don't get, it's beyond my pay grade to decide that. So these are unacceptable to a highly accomplished, practical, accomplished person or educator in the field. And I'm just begging you to give it strong consideration. You do redos because it's way more demanding. What's going soft and is a cop-out as a weak teacher is giving an F and thinking that teaches. Study how we teach responsibility, and you would never again deny a redo. You would say, get on the bicycle again and try riding it again with the coaching I just gave you. And we're going to do it over and over and over until you learn. That's way more demanding than the first time you rode a bike, you fell off. Well, that's it. You're a non-walker. We have to sign you up for Uber and Lyft if they come this far out in our community. You would never do that. So a reminder that I painted on the side of a school bus just for you, that recovering from failure is the thing that teaches, not the label for failure. And it's a false assumption that F's and D's and zeros and ones have the teaching capacity that some people assign to each of those symbols. It's getting in, walking with them as they recover from the mistakes they've made that actually teaches. If I had Tesla, this would be even more powerful, but I'll settle for Edison. Yeah. Every exemplar I lift up of somebody who's an expert at something, they did it a bajillion times and they screwed up a bajillion times and they got feedback. And that was the thing that led them forward. So it's the idea of first attempt in learning. Fail. Yeah. So it's a positive thing, not a stigmatizing thing when you fail. It's not weakness. It's a virtuous thing. And then a reminder, please watch this video, because the very last statement that this professor of physics tells us, who's teaching us about learning a skateboarding trick. He's a physicist, but a skateboarding champion. It's really cool. It's a TED Talk, is about real-time meaningful feedback. That is the teacher's role in the situation. If the child could get feedback from other sources, we wouldn't be as necessary to their learning. But that's the ultimate role. Now, we do presentation, but we can facilitate students kind of doing that on our own. It's the feedback, the interaction, where our real craft and science comes out as educators. So I'm going to recommend this video to you. Just be cautious and not show it to primary children, maybe middle school and higher, because he does say ass and crap each time once and not gratuitously, but you are the one that has to explain to grade 2s why it's okay for some adults to say ass and crap. Maybe in your community that's fine, but you want to honor those values. It's something to consider. Then at the end of that, you have 4 slides of really cool, yeah, Casey, Kelsey, I can send that to Susan, the link for that if you'd like, but the link is actually listed right there on your screen. So you could type that in. You could type in Dr. Tay skateboarding and it will come right up. But even better, on my website under the multimedia page, I have that video there for you. It's stored there. You can click on that and just watch it from there if you like. And by the way, there's 2 multimedia sections. There's one that says multimedia and there's one that says other, and there's more multimedia there. So it could be one of those tabs as you do that. Thank you, Kelsey, for taking a look at that. But now you've got 4 slides of things you can do with redos and retakes that you can do that teach kids responsibility, and you don't lose your sanity by being overwhelmed with the requests for redos. So you got the 4 slides. Chapter 16, if you email me, I will send that to you as you do that. And then this is a fascinating video, and I can post this to you if you like. But this teacher, this TED Talk, and we're running a little bit out of time, but she talks about, let me just pause for a second. She talks about feedback in the corporate business world. It's only 5 minutes long. But when you watch it, you start hearing all the stuff we've been studying in education this whole time. And it was just released in 2020. Let me just show you 1 minute's worth, and then I'll close up with some other ideas.
If you look at like a carpenter, they have a toolbox. A dentist, they have their drills. In our era and the type of work most of us are doing, the tool we most need is actually centered around being able to give and receive feedback well. Humans have been talking about feedback for centuries. In fact, Confucius, way back in 500 BC, talked about how important it is to be able to say difficult messages well. But to be honest, we're still pretty bad at it. In fact, a recent Gallup survey found that only 26% of employees strongly agree that the feedback they get actually improves their work. Those numbers are pretty dismal. So what's going on? The way that most people give their feedback actually isn't brain friendly. People fall into one of 2 camps. Either they're of the camp that is very indirect and soft, and the brain doesn't even recognize that feedback is being given, or it's just simply confused. Or they fall into the other camp of being too direct. And with that, it tips the other person into the land of being defensive. There's this part of the brain called the amygdala, and it's scanning at all times to figure out whether the message has a social threat attached to it. With that, we'll move forward in defensiveness, we'll move backwards in retreat. And what happens is the feedback giver then starts to dysregulate as well. They add more ums and ahs and justifications, and the whole thing gets wonky really fast. It doesn't have to be this way. I and my team have spent many years going into different companies and asking who here is a great feedback giver. Anybody who's named again and again, we actually bring into our labs to see what they're doing differently. And what we find is that there's a 4-part formula that you can use to say any difficult message well. Okay, are you ready for it? Here we go. The first part of the formula is what we call the micro yes. Great feedback givers begin their feedback by asking a question that is short but important. It lets the brain know that feedback is actually coming. It would be something, for example, like, do you have 5 minutes to talk about how that last conversation went?
And we can go on from there. So if you would like this link, the other remaining 4 points are ones that we've already made from the world of education. It was so validating to see that. So after this, what you have are resources. Most student management record systems allow you to give feedback right there on the screen for parent portal or parent view. This is an article that came out last year on great assessment of feedback resources. This just came out this summer and was not in the original slide presentation. And its whole dedication is on descriptive feedback, and it's recommended by all the teachers who are going gradeless. There's a whole community of teachers going gradeless. And then how do you increase the importance of feedback? So it might be something you want to explore. These are those videos I did with the animated hand describing feedback techniques that you can share with yourself, with students, with their parents, aunts and uncles who are helping them at home. And then a reminder is you do the feedback, you've got to get learning to the students. You got to find ways to get the assessments back from them and then be able to get feedback back to them. So I've shared this before, but these are 2 slides on creative ways in North America that people are doing this. And then these are my favorite go-to books for formative assessment and descriptive feedback. We've cited a number of these during the handout. So I'm going to recommend all of these as particularly practical in your approach. Plus, you've got my book there on the right. That's Fair as Noise Equals 2nd edition. On the left, a book I wrote on summarization techniques, which make great assessment techniques if you want to grab onto that. And then these are people who respond to you. Some are Canadian, some are North American, some are from other parts of the world. All of them will give you some help with your feedback. And then processing your own development. For Virginia, I had to do a whole course on descriptive feedback. And it turned out there were 17 different processing activities. So I've provided them for you. And again, if you can enlarge, you can see it. If you want to email me, I will send you the enlarged print version where there's 1 slide per page so you can read everything. But what it is you've been through this course with me, so to speak. What we did today, and maybe you're going to view the one from May if you haven't, or you've already viewed that. Then taking that together, how do I do some things here so I can chew on this myself and carry it forward? So these are PD things for your own processing of this kind of overwhelming amount of idea after idea, information fire hose of ideas. So you have 17 of them here in your handout already. At the very end, as we bring this to a close, I just want to remind you that it's an overt act of direct instruction, developing student self-efficacy, fortify your lessons, get the awesome power of feedback. And if you'd like to follow up, I am there with you anytime you like. Thank you so much. And thank you, ERLC, for your long relationship in 2020, for letting me be a part and play in your sandbox a little. It's been nothing but joy. So thank you so much to both parties, today's participants in ERLC. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Rick. On behalf of ERLC, I would like to formally thank you for being so willing to offer your expertise in assessment and grading with Alberta educators and beyond. Back in April, you were actually one of the very first educational assessment leaders to not only respond to my tweet requesting for help of navigating the muddy waters of how do we assess students when they move to online learning, but you've also been so generous in sharing all of your resources, making the recordings of these webinars available for us to post on our ERLC YouTube channel. And so I definitely want to thank you. I have followed you as an instructional leader throughout my career and will continue to do so to follow you in your retirement. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. Good luck in your new journeys and trying to do part-time ERLC and full-time teaching English. Oh, what a challenge, let alone everything else you're doing. But thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we will now conclude this webinar. Have a good evening.
All right. Thank you, Susan.